Every year, millions of people drive past haunted houses, abandoned asylums, and so-called cursed forests without ever stopping to look twice. Most of these places fall apart under the smallest amount of scrutiny. Shine a flashlight on them, bring in a camera crew, run a few tests, and the mystery evaporates almost instantly. But there is one 512-acre plot of land in a quiet corner of Utah that does the exact opposite. The more equipment you point at it, the stranger it gets. The harder scientists try to explain it away, the louder it screams back. And right now, as you watch this, there is a team of investigators, engineers, and astrophysicists standing on that land with millions of dollars of surveillance gear, military-grade sensors, drones, rockets, and even a dedicated satellite orbiting overhead, and they are all asking the same question that a terrified family of ranchers asked more than 30 years ago. What is happening here? That place is Skinwalker Ranch. And here's the part that should make the hair on your arms stand up. The activity on this ranch is not some dusty legend from decades ago that people are still arguing about. It is happening again, right now. In recent months, the phenomena that made this ranch infamous have not died down. They have intensified. The signals are getting stronger, the events are happening more frequently. And the people studying it say they are picking up things on their instruments that they have never recorded before in all their years on the property. This is a ranch where cattle have been found surgically mutilated and completely drained of blood, with no footprints and no blood on the ground. A ranch where men have walked up to a specific patch of dirt and walked away hours later with unexplained radiation burns, brain swelling, and injuries that doctors could not account for. A ranch where drones flying perfectly well suddenly drop out of the sky the moment they cross an invisible line. A ranch where, according to the family that started it all, a wolf the size of a calf stood in front of them, took multiple point-blank rounds from a rifle, and simply walked away as if nothing had happened. For several days, I went down the rabbit hole on this one. I read the original newspaper reports, I went through the declassified government documents, I watched hours of footage, I listened to the first-hand accounts of the people who were actually there, and I came out the other side with the same thing everyone else seems to come out with. A lot more questions than answers. Because here is the truly unsettling part. Skinwalker Ranch is one of the only paranormal locations on Earth where the weirdness has been measured, not just felt, not just whispered about around a campfire. Measured on scientific instruments by credentialed scientists, repeatedly, and those measurements are getting more extreme by the season. So if you have ever wondered whether any of this stuff is real, this is the one case that refuses to behave. This is the one that doesn't go quiet when you turn on the lights. This might just be the single most studied, most documented, and most genuinely inexplicable piece of land in the entire world, and something weird is happening on it. Again, let's get into it. Skinwalker Ranch sits in the Uinta Basin in northeastern Utah, a wide, remote stretch of high desert that has, for as long as anyone can remember, had a reputation for strangeness. The local Ute people reportedly avoided this land for generations. The Navajo to the south had a word for the kind of evil they believed walked these parts. The Yi-Naldlushi, the Skinwalker, a malevolent witch said to be able to take the shape of any animal it wanted. The land itself was considered cursed long before any reality show ever pointed a camera at it. But more on that part later, because the legend is only half the story. The modern chapter of this mystery begins in 1994, when Terry and Gwen Sherman bought the property, hoping for exactly what you'd expect a ranching family to want: a quiet, normal life raising cattle. What they got instead was roughly 18 months of escalating terror that would eventually drive them off their own land. It started small, strange lights in the sky, a peculiar feeling of being watched. But it did not stay small for long. The Shermans reported seeing UFOs, glowing orbs that moved with apparent intelligence, and crop circle-like impressions pressed into the soil, and then came the cattle. Over the course of their time on the ranch, the Shermans say they lost numerous cattle under circumstances that no rancher could explain. Some animals simply vanished into thin air, leaving no tracks, no blood, no drag marks, nothing, in fields covered in snow where any normal predator would have left an obvious trail. Others were found mutilated with what witnesses described as surgical precision, perfectly cut incisions, specific organs removed, and the entire carcass drained of blood, again, with no blood anywhere on the surrounding ground. To this day, Cattle mutilation remains one of the most disturbing and least understood phenomena associated with the ranch. But the single most famous encounter, the one that arguably gave this place its dark legend, involved a creature. Terry Sherman reported watching an enormous wolf-like animal, far larger than any normal wolf, approach his cattle. He fired at it at close range. According to his account, the rounds had no effect whatsoever. The creature didn't flinch, didn't bleed, didn't fall. It simply turned and walked away, leaving behind tracks that, according to some retellings, eventually just stopped, as if the thing had vanished mid-stride. Now, if that were the whole story, we could maybe write it off as a frightened family and an overactive imagination. But here is where things start to get strange, because the Shermans were not the last people to experience this. They were the first of many. And unlike most ghost stories, when they left, the phenomenon did not leave with them. After the Shermans sold the property in 1996, the ranch became the subject of serious, well-funded scientific investigation, which we will get to. And across nearly 3 decades of observation by multiple different teams, a consistent and frankly bizarre pattern of phenomena has been reported again and again by different people who often had no contact with one another. Let's talk about the anomalies themselves, because the list is long. First, there is the issue of electronics. On much of the ranch, and especially in certain hotspots, electronic equipment simply fails. Cameras die. Batteries that were fully charged drain to nothing in minutes. Cell phones stop working, vehicles refuse to start. Sophisticated, expensive instruments brought onto the property by trained engineers will glitch, freeze, and malfunction in ways the engineers themselves cannot reproduce or explain anywhere else. It's almost as if something on this land actively interferes with technology, and it tends to do it at the worst possible moment, right when someone is about to capture clear evidence. Then there's the radiation. This is not folklore. This is data. Investigators on the ranch have recorded sudden, dramatic spikes in ionizing radiation, the dangerous kind, appearing out of nowhere and then vanishing just as fast. And these spikes have not been harmless. One of the property's own superintendents, a man named Thomas Winterton, suffered a severe injury described as a subdermal hematoma, along with brain swelling after spending time working near one of the ranch's most active areas. Medical professionals reportedly could not explain how the injury occurred through any conventional trauma. He is not the only person to have walked away from this land physically hurt. Then there is what investigators call the bubble, or the dome. Over years of observation, the team came to believe that a large portion of the ranch sits underneath some kind of invisible boundary, a roughly dome-shaped zone where the strangeness concentrates. Objects that try to pass through this boundary, especially from above, are met with resistance. Drones flown into the airspace over the most active part of the ranch have been reported to suddenly lose control, get pushed backward by as much as 200 feet, or simply drop out of the sky entirely, with one drone reportedly hitting an invisible something with an audible thud before spiraling to the ground. Above this zone, even aircraft instruments have reportedly behaved strangely. And at the very center of all of it is a feature called the mesa, a raised plateau of rock and earth that the investigators believe is the epicenter of the entire phenomenon. The closer you get to it, the weirder things become. Animals reportedly refuse to go near certain spots. People report sudden waves of nausea, dread, and the overwhelming sense of being watched by something unseen. And it is near this mesa that some of the most serious injuries and the most extreme instrument readings have occurred. There's also the question of the animals and the witnesses. Over the years, people on the ranch have reported seeing creatures that should not exist, hearing disembodied voices, watching orbs of light dance across the property, and in more than a few cases, experiencing what can only be described as missing time. People have reported precognitive dreams after visiting. Some have reported feeling that whatever is on this land is not just present, but aware. That it knows it's being watched. That it responds. And consider the texture of the individual encounters, because the details are what make this so hard to wave away. Investigators have described standing in a field on a calm, clear night and watching a beam of light punch down from the sky into the dirt, only to find scorched, anomalous ground the next morning. They've described cattle reacting in blind panic to something none of the humans could see. They've described a single cow that vanished from a snow-covered pasture overnight, leaving the snow around it completely undisturbed, no tracks leading in, no tracks leading out, as if the animal had been plucked straight up into the air. These are not the vague, smudgy claims you usually get with the paranormal. They are specific, repeatable, and disturbingly consistent across people who never met each other and had no reason to coordinate their stories. Now here is where things go from merely strange to genuinely unsettling, because the phenomena on this ranch seem to react to observation. The more aggressively the investigators probe, drill, fly, and test, the more aggressively the ranch seems to respond. It is almost as if the land has an intelligence, and it does not appreciate being studied. Does that sound impossible? Maybe, but it is exactly what person after person, including hardened skeptics and trained scientists, has reported after spending real time on this property. So what could possibly explain all of this? The bulletproof creature, the bloodless cattle, the radiation injuries, the dome that swats drones out of the air, the technology that dies on command, the sense of an intelligent presence? Currently, there are two major theories, and while both of them are thought-provoking, even compelling in places, neither one fully explains everything on its own. Let's look at the first one. The first theory is what I'll call the extraterrestrial theory, or the ET theory. In plain terms, there are a lot of serious people, and I do mean serious, credentialed, government-adjacent people, who believe that whatever is happening at Skinwalker Ranch is connected to non-human intelligence from somewhere other than Earth. Possibly visitors. Possibly their technology. Possibly some kind of doorway they use to come and go. Here's why that theory has real teeth. To begin with, the single most consistent category of sighting at the ranch, going all the way back to the Sherman family, is the UFO sighting. Glowing orbs, structured craft, lights that perform impossible maneuvers, accelerating, stopping dead, and changing direction in ways that violate everything we understand about conventional aircraft. The Uinta Basin as a whole has been a UFO hotspot for decades, with sightings reported by ranchers and residents long before Skinwalker Ranch became famous. This isn't one family's story. It's a regional pattern stretching back generations. But here is what really separates Skinwalker Ranch from every roadside UFO legend you've ever heard. The United States government got involved, and not in a small way. In 2007, largely driven by the interest of then-Senator Harry Reid, the Department of Defense quietly directed around $22 million toward a program to study unidentified aerial phenomena and related anomalies. A significant portion of that interest reportedly traced directly back to this ranch. Think about what that means. The American Defense Establishment, the same institution responsible for national security, looked at this 512-acre patch of Utah desert and decided it was worth millions of taxpayer dollars to investigate. Governments do not spend money like that on campfire stories. Something convinced very powerful, very serious people that there was a real, physical phenomenon here worth understanding. And then there's the bubble itself, the invisible dome over the ranch. To the people who lean toward the ET theory, this is the most important clue of all. Some of the investigators and outside experts who have studied the ranch, including figures with deep backgrounds in the government's own UAP investigations and respected astrophysicists, have floated a genuinely staggering idea. They've suggested that the bubble could be something like a localized wormhole, a fold in space-time, or a cloaked craft, a piece of technology so advanced that it remains effectively invisible and stationary even as the Earth rotates beneath it. Sit with that for a second. The theory on the table, proposed not by random internet users, but by people who have advised official government programs, is that there may be a permanent doorway or a hidden vehicle parked over this ranch, and that the lights, the orbs, the radiation, and the strange creatures are all traffic moving through that doorway. It would explain so much. It would explain why the orbs appear and vanish without ever seeming to travel from somewhere to somewhere. It would explain why drones get pushed back at a specific altitude because they're hitting the edge of something. It would explain the radiation spikes, the byproduct of energy moving between one place and another. It would even explain the cattle. If there is non-human intelligence operating here, the mutilations, surgical, precise, and utterly inexplicable, start to look less like the work of predators and more like the work of something studying the local biology, and it gets stranger. Some who have studied the ranch suggest that the phenomenon isn't limited to the sky at all. There are accounts suggesting activity beneath the surface, as if whatever is here uses the ground as much as the air. The investigators have drilled, scanned with ground-penetrating radar, and pulled strange materials out of the earth near the mesa, including a peculiar ceramic-like substance that doesn't have an obvious natural explanation. If this ranch is a hub, a station, a doorway, then it would make sense that the evidence isn't just floating above us. It's buried right under our feet. Of course, even the strongest version of the ET theory runs into a wall, because aliens and wormholes, as wild as they are, still don't quite explain the deeply personal, almost malevolent nature of what happens here. The sense of being watched, the feeling of dread, the way the phenomenon seems to target people, to follow them home, to get inside their heads. That feels less like technology and more like something else entirely. Which brings us to the second theory. With a place that defies so many of the basic rules of physics, biology, and electronics, it should be no surprise that a lot of people, including some of the investigators themselves, have concluded that the answer is not extraterrestrial at all. It's supernatural. And the deeper you go into the history of this land, the harder that theory is to dismiss. Remember the name, Skinwalker Ranch. That name did not come from a TV producer. It comes from the Yinald Lushi, the skinwalker of Navajo tradition, a kind of witch said to have traded its humanity for the dark power to transform into animals, to mimic voices, to deceive, and to do harm. According to the lore passed down by native peoples of the region, this land sat along what some have called the Path of the Skinwalker, a corridor of cursed ground that you simply did not trespass upon. The Ute people are said to have avoided it. The warnings were specific, and they were old, and they were taken seriously long before any rancher or any scientist ever showed up with a camera. Now, you can dismiss that as superstition if you like, but consider how neatly the legend maps onto the modern reports. A shape-shifting creature that can take the form of an enormous wolf and shrug off bullets? The Shermans saw exactly that. Disembodied voices and the sense of being mimicked and watched, reported again and again. A malevolent intelligence that seems to know when it's being observed and grows more active in response? That's not just consistent with the Skinwalker legend. It is the Skinwalker legend. And here's the part that genuinely gives people chills. The phenomenon on this ranch appears to be intelligent, and not in a friendly way. People who spend significant time on the property frequently report that the activity seems to follow them. There are accounts of investigators and family members experiencing strange occurrences not on the ranch, but back at their own homes, sometimes hundreds of miles away, after they had left. It's as though something attached itself to them. In the world of the paranormal, this is sometimes called the hitchhiker effect, and Skinwalker Ranch is its most infamous example. Whatever is here, the supernatural theory says, is not a place, it's a presence, and presences can travel. This is the theory that the most serious early investigation actually leaned toward. When the ranch was purchased in 1996 by the aerospace billionaire Robert Bigelow, he founded a scientific organization and put a team of trained researchers on the property for years, monitoring it around the clock with cameras and instruments. One of the lead scientists on that effort, Colm Kelleher, later co-authored a book about the experience titled Hunt for the Skinwalker. And while that team was rigorous and scientific in its approach, the phenomena they documented, intelligent, evasive, and seemingly aware, pushed the investigation again and again toward conclusions that science alone could not contain. In fact, one of the most maddening features of the ranch, reported across multiple investigations, is what researchers describe as a kind of trickster quality. The phenomenon seems to deliberately avoid producing clean, conclusive proof. It will perform dramatically when no one is recording and go silent the moment the cameras roll. It will dangle just enough evidence to keep people hooked and then snatch it away. Skeptics say this is exactly what you'd expect from a phenomenon that isn't real. But believers point out that a deceptive, intelligent, manipulative force toying with its observers is precisely what the old legends described. A skinwalker, after all, is defined by deception. So which is it? A malevolent, supernatural intelligence rooted in centuries-old native warnings that watches, deceives, follows people home, and grows stronger the more attention it's given? Or is there a more grounded explanation hiding underneath all of this? Because before we crown this the most haunted, most cursed ground on Earth, honesty demands that we hear the other side. As it turns out, skeptics have spent just as much energy trying to tear this mystery down as believers have spent building it up. And to be fair to them, some of their explanations are genuinely strong. If we're going to take this seriously, we have to take the debunkers seriously too. Let's start with the cattle mutilations, arguably the most viscerally disturbing part of the whole story. As horrifying as they look, mainstream investigators have pointed out for decades that what appears to be surgical mutilation is very often the ordinary work of nature. After an animal dies in the field, scavengers, birds, insects, and predators tend to go for the softest tissue first. The eyes, the tongue, the lips, the soft underbelly, the genitals. As the carcass bloats and decomposes, the skin can split along clean, straight lines that look unnervingly precise to the human eye. The bloodless appearance can be explained by the way blood pools, clots, and is consumed after death. Cattle mutilation has been reported all over the world, far from any cursed ranch, and conventional explanations have accounted for the overwhelming majority of cases. It looks like the work of a scalpel. It is usually the work of decomposition and scavengers. What about the bulletproof wolf? Skeptics would say that a frightened man, in low light, facing a large animal, is not a reliable measuring instrument. Misjudged distance, missed shots, an ordinary large predator, and the natural human tendency to remember a terrifying event as more impossible than it actually was, can together turn an ordinary encounter into a legend over years of retelling. The UFO sightings? The Uinta Basin is remote, dark, and ringed by military activity and air traffic. Unusual lights in a dark desert sky, planets, satellites, aircraft, flares, and atmospheric effects are misidentified as UFOs constantly, all over the world. A region primed by decades of stories is a region where people are looking up, expecting to see something, and finding it. And the radiation? This is an important one. The Uinta Basin is, geologically, an area with natural deposits of uranium and other radioactive minerals, and it's also one of the most active oil and gas regions in the country. Natural radiation, geological activity, and industrial operations can all produce readings that, stripped of context and presented dramatically, look far more sinister than they are. Then there's the most uncomfortable point of all, and it's one even fair-minded believers have to sit with. The most rigorous, longest-running scientific investigation of the ranch, the one funded by Robert Bigelow and staffed by actual scientists for years, came away largely empty-handed. In the words of Colm Kelleher, the scientist who was there, after years of family trauma and focused investigation, they managed to obtain very little physical evidence of anomalous phenomena. At least no physical evidence that could be considered as conclusive proof of anything. Years of around-the-clock monitoring by trained researchers, and no smoking gun. And we can't ignore the obvious. Today, Skinwalker Ranch is the subject of a hit television series. Television shows need ratings. Ratings need cliffhangers, drama, and the constant promise that an answer is just around the corner. A skeptic would argue that this is the real reason the mystery never quite resolves. Not because the phenomenon is a cunning trickster, but because a solved mystery is a canceled show. Confirmation bias, dramatic editing, and the powerful human hunger to believe can do an enormous amount of heavy lifting. These are good arguments, honest ones. And if this were any other location, they might be enough to close the case completely. But they're not. Because there's a reason this story refuses to die. And it's the reason we have to talk about what's happening on that ranch right now. Here's the problem with the debunkers' tidy explanations. They explain the old stuff, the stuff from the 90s, the stuff from grainy retellings and frightened ranchers. What they do not explain is what is being recorded on that ranch today, on calibrated scientific instruments, in front of multiple witnesses, with the cameras rolling. Because remember the promise of this whole thing. Something weird isn't just happening at Skinwalker Ranch, it's happening again. And this time, it is being documented in a way it never has been before in the entire history of this property. Since real-time scientific investigation returned to the ranch under its current owner, the Utah real estate mogul Brandon Fugel, who revealed himself as the owner in 2020 and opened the gates to a team of engineers and scientists, the phenomena have not faded with all the attention. They've escalated. And in the most recent stretch of investigation, That escalation has reached a level that even the veterans on the property describe as unprecedented. The team's own assessment is blunt. The phenomena and the signals are increasing in intensity and in frequency, not decreasing, not staying flat, increasing. The longer they study this land, the more it gives them, which is the exact opposite of what should happen if this were a hoax or a misunderstanding that crumbles under scrutiny. Hoaxes get weaker when you point more cameras at them. This is getting stronger, and the investigators have escalated right back. In the most recent campaign, the team brought in technology that has never been pointed at this ranch before, including a dedicated satellite, putting an eye in orbit specifically to watch this single patch of Utah desert from above. They've launched swarms of 100 drones at once into the airspace over the bubble. They've fired bolts of electricity into the anomaly to provoke a response. They've drilled into the mesa and pulled up that strange ceramic material for analysis. And what they're getting back is not silence. According to the most recent investigations, new tests near the mesa have produced loud, clear evidence of buried metallic objects hidden beneath the ground. A new aerial experiment reportedly yielded solid evidence of a giant force field, an actual measurable force field, sitting in the middle of the ranch, which is the closest anyone has come to confirming the long-rumored bubble as a real, physical structure rather than a feeling. The drone swarm returned data about the boundary of that anomaly. And in one of the most unsettling recent developments, when a Navajo shaman performed a sacred ritual on one of the homesteads, the team reportedly encountered a cascade of mind-bending phenomena. The ancient tradition and the modern instruments lighting up at the exact same time, as if the legend and the data were finally pointing at the same thing. So, let's go back to the question we started with. What is happening at Skinwalker Ranch? After everything, the honest answer is that no single theory fully closes the case. The extraterrestrial theory explains the craft, the doorway, the radiation, and the government's millions, but not the personal, malevolent, follow-you-home nature of it. The supernatural theory explains the intelligence, the deception, the curse, and the centuries of warnings, but not the hard physical readings on the instruments. The skeptics explain the old legends, but not the brand new data that's getting stronger by the month. But here is the payoff. Here is the thing that, after going down this entire rabbit hole, I cannot shake. Every other paranormal location on Earth has one thing in common. It goes quiet when you study it hard enough. The ghost stops showing up. The lights turn out to be headlights. The mystery dissolves the moment you take it seriously. Skinwalker Ranch is the single glaring exception. It is the one place where the more rigorously, more scientifically, more aggressively it is studied, the more it gives back. The phenomenon does not retreat from the instruments. It performs for them. It engages with them. It pushes back against the drones, spikes the radiation detectors, registers on the satellites, and injures the people who get too close. Whatever is on that land is not behaving like a legend that's running out of steam. It's behaving like something that is waking up. And that's the part that should stay with you. We are not talking about a story from 30 years ago that people are still arguing about. We are talking about a live, ongoing, escalating event. As you watch this, there are scientists standing in that field, looking at readings that are climbing higher than anything they've recorded before. On a piece of land that native peoples warned us about for centuries, that the United States government spent millions investigating, and that to this day has never been explained. For 3 decades, every time the world looked away from Skinwalker Ranch, it went quiet. And every single time the world looked back, it was there waiting, stranger and stronger than before. Right now, the instruments are screaming louder than they ever have. The doorway, whatever it is, appears to be opening wider, and the people closest to it believe they are nearer to an answer than anyone has ever been. Something weird is happening at Skinwalker Ranch. Again. And this time, all of us are watching.